My name is Jesse. I took the summer job at Camp Blackridge to stall the parts of my life that felt like endings. The offers I wasn't ready for, the apartment lease I hadn't signed, the polite lies adults tell when they've decided they're done changing. For 6 weeks I taught kids how to start a fire without a lighter, how to thread a compass, how to carry someone who'd twisted an ankle back to the road. Mostly I learned how to keep my voice steady when small things went wrong. There are 7 rules at Blackridge. They sound bizarre if you read them fast, or if you're from the city and your idea of safety begins and ends with a seatbelt and an ambulance. But Caleb Halverson, the director with a white towel always draped over one shoulder, like he'd stepped out of a mid-century photograph, didn't hand them out as a joke. He slid a thin stack of laminated cards across the mess hall table like he was giving us prayer books. "Read them," he said. "Learn them and don't improvise." He spoke in that low, quiet way that made everyone listen. You could see the staff line up behind him. Megan, with her perpetual ponytail and a lip gloss smudge because she'd forgotten to clean her hands after peeling potatoes. Rick in boots scuffed like he'd been kicked by the earth itself. Tyler, who thought rules were suggestions disguised as authority. Each card had a heading. Each had a single sentence beneath, like a commandment carved into plastic. Halverson didn't read them aloud for show. He read them, and then looked us in the eye one by one, the way a teacher scans a row of students before calling on someone to explain themselves. Rule 1, count shoes first. Rule 2, field 3 ends at the broken birch. Rule 3, if the woods call your name, do not answer. Rule 4, the lake has vampires. Rule 5, tapping at a window after lights out means lights on, wake the second counselor. Rule 6, nobody near the quarry fence after dark. Rule 7, 3 whistle blasts, freeze, count, regroup. We laughed, nervous at the phrasing. The lake has vampires sounded like something teenagers would come up with at midnight, but Halverson watched us laugh and did not smile. There was a quiet gravity to him. He carried an institutional memory like a second skin. There were things the camp had seen and then papered over with new paint and new banners, but the rules stayed. They were old enough to feel ridiculous and new enough to be laminated. Orientation lasted longer than the checklist. We walked the horseshoe of cabins, Halverson stopping where the broken birch split the tree line and pointing at the shallow dip in the field where kids ran soccer drills until dusk. He walked us to the dock at Wolf Creek, what everyone just called the lake, and tapped the planks. We went all the way to the quarry fence, that rusted chain link that separated the camp from an old stone cut where the ground dropped away and the dark water pooled below. "You don't change them because you think they're right," he said finally, hands folded looking at our faces like he wanted us to remember the weight of the syllables. "You don't change them because the moment you start thinking you can invent safety on the fly, something tests that thinking. These rules are the only procedures that worked without improvisation. They kept us from making panic decisions. They kept us from chasing shadows. If you want the full list and the story behind each rule, hit like and stay with me." We split the staff into pairs for the first week. Legacy practice. Megan and I were paired. She liked the way the map room smelled, the cedar dust that settled under the table, and she kept a tiny notebook where she drew crude maps of the routes we took during patrol. Rick partnered up with Halverson on perimeter checks. Tyler was on swim duty with the lifeguard, a kid named Shane who'd never met a rule he wouldn't test. Rule 1, count shoes first. It sounds absurd until you're counting. In the blue-gray light before breakfast, the clack and scrape of bare feet on the mess hall floor. We did it right. Shoes under bunks, each pair lined heel to heel like small, obedient animals. We learned the system in the first hour. 3 taps on the bunk when kids were accounted, 2 taps for the counselor, an old Morse code of a place trying to be civilized in the dark. We weren't always racing clocks. Sometimes it was a tie to routine, the small human habit that kept numbers from dissolving into worry. But then the count became a diagnostic. There's a season at camp where you internalize systems. We learned to read the room by what the shoes told us. One night, weeks in, someone in bunk 4 complained about a scorpion, and a size 9 sneaker was in the doorway, not under the bunk. Megan crouched, thumbed the laces. "Looks like he stepped out," she said. We followed the trail of other evidence, the flashlight under a chair, s'mores wrappers outside the cabin, a smear of damp dirt on the stoop. Shoes are honest like that. They don't lie. They tell you where a body has been. Halverson taught us that shoes are a map you can read blindfolded. It was the shoes that made us stop a search the summer Evan disappeared. Not because a pair wasn't where it should be. They were neatly placed under his bed, but because of what else was missing. The shoes told us the timeline, the boundaries of the movement. They were a quiet, stubborn piece of data in a weekend of many impressions. Rule 2. Field 3 ends at the broken birch. Field 3 was a wide, forgiving swath of grass hemmed by pines, where we taught archery and made kids chase a soccer ball until their shirts were stained with summer. At one end of the field, a birch tree split cleanly down the trunk where lightning or time had removed a chunk of its bark. It leaned like a signpost. The rule was simple and idiotic sounding in equal measure. The field ended where the birch split the line of sight. Beyond that, you didn't chase the ball. Kids chase balls. That's literally what they do. You shout, you blow a whistle, you watch them sprint past a boundary and nothing happens for months. But one afternoon during Capture the Flag practice, a ball we'd launched back to the line didn't come. It had rolled farther than it should. Tyler, who had the kind of restless energy that turned warnings into invitations, trotted over to retrieve it, and then paused. There, half hidden in the shoulder-high grass, was another ball. The same make, but older, faded with a seam, split like a mouth. Draped over it was part of a shirt so thin with age its camp logo was a ghost. We told ourselves it was trash, the things left by past campers. But Halverson's face took on a new, careful shape. He called a perimeter check, asked questions that landed like small stones. Who had been playing here before? When was the last time we closed Field 3? He reminded us. The broken birch demarcated more than grass. It marked a line where the camp's rules met a different kind of geography, the parts where people stopped paying attention or where attention didn't help. When we bent to pick up that older ball, we felt the gravity of past summers. Evidence, Halverson taught us, is patient. It will wait for someone curious enough to find it. Rule 3. If the woods call your name, do not answer. This rule was ridiculous as a printed line, and sinister when you stood at the edge of the woods and heard your name come back at you in the wind. The woods at Blackridge could make a voice out of anything. Twig snap, underbrush, the echo off granite like a throat clearing. We practiced ignoring it the way you practice ignoring a fly buzzing while you eat. Reflexive, slightly annoyed, a show of discipline. I remember a Tuesday when the late light wound like ribbon between trunks, and from past experience, you learned not to rely on intuition. Jessie, the wind seemed to say once, from deeper in the trees. It had a child's cadence, a familiar lilt. I stopped. The hair on my arms prickled. Megan, close behind, shifted her pack to let me know she was alert. We looked at each other, the way animals check eyes for the signal to run. The rule said, don't answer. The rule was practical. Voices in the woods could be tricksters. Tall fraternity of sound designed to move you deeper when the path home was behind you. You discover, slowly and with small thrills of fear, how persuasive your own memory can be. It will mimic a father's laugh, a neighbor's voice, the cadence of a sibling. The woods are patient with that confusion. If you answer, you complicate the problem. If you allow yourself to be baited by a voice you recognize because you've conjured it in your own head, you give it purchase. Tyler almost learned this the hard way. He liked to press boundaries like a finger on a bruise. Once, in a practical joke tone, he mimicked his sister's voice from behind a line of saplings to watch the way a younger camper followed it. Halverson found out when the kid wandered too deep. You are not a god, Halverson told Tyler very quietly, and you could see the lesson settle like frost. We did a retraining the next day. Stay visible, stay in pairs, and if you hear a voice, treat it as a hazard. Rule 4. The lake has vampires. We called it mythology the first week, the same way we called old war stories camp lore. Wolf Creek is shallow at the edges and suddenly not. It smells like decomposed leaves in August, like algae rolled tight as bread. At dusk, the surface looks like glass smeared with oil. You could see shadows under the water if the light hit right, things that might have been stones or fish or nothing at all. The phrase, "the lake has vampires," was shorthand. Campers loved the line. It made for good horror skits at cabin time, and older counsellors said it with a smile, the same way you'd tell a child there's a monster under the bed, but there are tacks on the floor and a nightlight in plain sight. The rule was twofold. Don't go in alone after dusk, and if something seems to be in the water, if the surface ripples and holds a shape, do not stick your hand in to see what it is. You can laugh at that rule until you see pale faces under the water. One evening, when the sun had sunk and the kids had been sent to their bunks after a swim relay, Tyler stayed behind on the dock to make a show of shining a flashlight across the surface. He liked to be seen. Shane, the lifeguard, had his whistle tucked into his palm like a reflex. Tyler hoped for a ripple, maybe a jump for the snack shop crowd. What happened instead was colder, and it moved slower than breath. The light caught something at the edge of vision, a pale oval, a pair of eyes like coins under glass. It didn't burst. There was no cinematic explosion, but there was a small, deliberate movement, like a hand testing the weight of air. The surface ran out of its stillness in a way that felt wrong. The water didn't splash so much as peel away. Tyler's foot hit a plank wrong and he stumbled backward, laughter strangled off in his throat. He fell onto his knees, and for the first time he looked genuinely unsettled. Shane blew a sharp single on his whistle, and the other counsellors rushed the dock. Halvorsen came out slow and efficient, the way people who've been doing a job for 40 years move through a problem. No theatrics, just work. He told everyone to step off the pier, to line up at the lakeside, and to shut the hell up. He had us sit on the shore with our feet in the gravel and stare straight ahead while he shone his flashlight. It felt like being made to stand at attention in front of something you cannot see. We did a perimeter that night. Megan and I walked the tree line, our boots leaving prints in the wet earth like tally marks. You could see the pale under the surface in the places the flashlight hit. The faces weren't faces in the human sense, more like pale ovals, the suggestion of a skull underwater. When you move slow enough, your brain supplies an identity to shapes that are mostly suggestion. The defensive part of my brain argued in logical terms, algae blooms, pale fish, the angle of the light. The other part, the part that learned the rules, kept slamming the brakes on prediction. That's the odd instrument rules play. They keep you from making too many leaps you might later regret. We closed the dock for a week after that. We posted signs, simple and official, taped to the splintered wood. Dock closed for safety. Campers took it as an adventure story and made up darker jokes. The staff took it as a red flag. Tyler sulked, then apologized in a way that meant nothing, but the lesson was imparted. If you test the rule, you might be the one who learns what it was trying to prevent. We locked the dock and doubled the swim check-ins. For a night, the lake seemed to listen and be quiet, like something offended and sulking. For a while, the water lay like parchment across the earth. Rule 5. Tapping at a window after lights out means lights on, wake the second counsellor. When I say tapping, imagine the faintest rhythmic insistence, 3 or 4 deliberate taps, like someone tracing the outline of a window with a knuckle. It has a pattern, a brittle patience. It never raps in panic. Halvorsen's rule required the first counsellor on duty to go on patrol, and the second counsellor, whoever that was for the week, to be roused immediately. We practiced waking each other, anchor to anchor. If you hear the tap, do not open the window from inside. Switch the lights on, awaken the second counsellor, and the director gets a radio page. One night at Cedar Ridge, after a thunderstorm had come through and most of the campers were exhausted, a marshal called lights out, and the tapping started. It was hesitant at first, a slow knuckle tap like someone testing glass. The kids woke with that jitter you see when you've been half asleep a long time. Megan flipped on the lights. The tapping stopped like someone had been cut off mid-sentence. We found small pale smudges near the sill, like the outline of a hand washed in chalk. No prints, just an impression where a palm had pressed and then left as though the shape had never been there. The teacher in me wanted to explain it. Condensation, a branch tapping from the storm, a prank. The Halvorsen part of me, trained, saw the pattern and treated it as an incipient event. We did perimeter checks, woke the second counsellor, and swept the grounds with flashlights until the dawn. There was no further contact that night, but it kept us from sleeping easily. Rule 6. Nobody near the quarry fence after dark. The quarry fence marks the place where the earth opens into a lip of rock and water, and beyond it, the quarry sits like a cut-out moon. People fell into quarries in places sometimes. There is always a human risk calculation, but rules at Blackridge are less about probabilities and more about threshold behaviors, what you do when the margin of error shrinks. We saw on a routine dusk sweep a figure standing just beyond the fence, tall enough to be noticed but not moving in the way a human does. It didn't hunch into the rocks. It was a stillness that read like surveillance. Rick saw it first and froze, 3 steps from the gate. He'd been with Halverson long enough to have his own catalogue of small, effective terror, the way the staff mutters in the radio when they've seen something they cannot name. We called Halverson, who came with a set of binoculars and a calm that felt like a blanket. "Don't go closer," he said, the sentence final and very precise. "Call it in, record it, and then leave the fence alone until daylight." He's a man who believes in paperwork as protection. He asked us to describe what we'd seen, the height, the position, whether it was a sound, and we answered in clipped sentences like field reports. He wanted a record, so if someone else noticed the fence figure, we'd have a baseline. He told us not to confront it. The rule is simple because confrontation begets error. Error produces panic. Panic is contagious and irrational, and camps are not built for chaos at night. We watched the fence for a while and then we left. The sound of our boots on the gravel the only movement. The figure didn't follow. Whether it was a person or something else, we never answered. The quarry fence became a line articulated by our fear. We didn't step over it even in daylight unless it was necessary, and Halverson authorized it. Rule 7. 3 whistle blasts. Freeze, count, regroup. We drilled that one until our mouths tasted of metal. When Halverson blew the whistle, it was the first noise that signaled all protocols had failed, and procedure had to take over from instinct. 1 blast meant, hold, stop what you're doing. 2 meant, gather your group. 3 meant everyone freezes, performs a roll call, and then regroups at the designated point. It was mechanical, the sort of thing that sounds overwrought until you've watched panic eat a plan. We practiced the whistle in the field the second week. Megan and I would be sorting equipment when Halverson would blow. 1 sharp peal that sounded like a small animal, then 2, then 3. We'd stop mid-action, the world folding into a single point. We'd count out loud the names like rosary beads. If anyone didn't answer, we'd note it, triangulate the likely place by last known location, and sweep. It was, functionally, an ordered stop to chaos. You do not try to be improvisational in that moment. The best thing you can do is follow the ritual until you have clarity. People sang it like a prayer at camp. 3 whistles is a freeze, in a mocking, half-joking chant while stacking life vests. But Halverson's voice behind it had the edge of experience. He'd seen drills that turned into real panic when someone refused to listen. The whistle was readiness turned into sound. That brings us back to the dock. Later that week, after the dock incident with Tyler and the pale shapes in the water, things at Blackridge had the tautness of a drum. We doubled the night patrol and instituted lights-on procedures. The kids asked questions at breakfast, like small concerned birds. Parents called to check and Halverson answered with a steady cadence. Rumors circulated. Someone had seen something move under the dock. Someone else mentioned an old camper who'd left in the middle of the night 10 summers ago. But Halverson kept the conversation tight. He didn't speculate. He managed. On the evening of the dock episode that would become the first real test, we had a late bonfire. The campers were sticky with marshmallows, and the night smelled like ash and pine resin. The counselors sat in a ring a short distance away. Tyler, who hadn't learned that halting his curiosity was a skill, insisted on a second watch at the dock after the bonfire. "I'll keep it light," he told Shane. "I'll be 2 minutes." Tyler was good for small theatrics. He liked to prove he wasn't a surefire victim of the camp's rules, the kind of person who thinks compliance is weakness. I watched him from the firelight. He carried a flashlight like a microphone, swaggering. Shane watched him the way people watch a match, interest and wariness. The rest of us joked, half-heartedly, about haunted lakes. It was the sort of ribbing that makes tasks feel lighter. He stepped onto the dock and clicked the beam into the water. The light found the pale ovals like coins and then something else. That stillness became organized, a suggestion of limbs. It was the wrong shape for fish. Tyler leaned over, laughed a little too loudly. "Come on," he said into the dark, a call to prove the water wrong. He extended the beam, and the shapes beneath the surface answered by moving in a way that seemed almost curious. The water didn't roar. It swelled like a held breath. Then the surface broke, not with splash but with a slow, cruel fold. Planks shifted under Tyler's hands. He yelped and tried to leap back, and his foot slid. For a moment, his grin went small, and someone else's face went big on his skin. You could see it in the way his shoulders tensed. Shane blew one single whistle blast that cut the night like a scalpel. The other counselors ran the few yards from the fire. It wasn't a cinematic grab. No one went under with screams. But the dock gave a groan like old timber morning, and Tyler's hands were wet and his shirt soaked at the hem. He staggered back toward the fire with crossed eyes, and in the water, a pale face seemed to press up toward the beam and then flatten, like a thing testing glass. Halvorsen arrived with the economy of movement that had become his hallmark. He said, "Back away," like a soft command, and that was the order. He told Shane to sound 3 whistle blasts at the second sign of disturbance. He told us to take a head count. He told Megan to record the time and the wind direction. He didn't seem frightened. If anything, he appeared narrowly concentrated, like someone who keeps trouble as a problem set rather than a drama. We ran the mechanics. Lights on, kids to bunks, head counts. Our radios clipped and staticked. The kids, who'd been roasting marshmallows 2 minutes earlier, shuffled to their cabins in pairs as counselors shepherded them, the small urgency of it all making their faces round and childlike in the flashlight beam. It was a drill, and a real event rolled together. The system took precedence because systems protect against panic. But even drills have consequences. Tyler sat by the fire that night, wrapped in a borrowed fleece, looking as if he'd seen the underside of a postcard. He told us nothing coherent about what he'd seen. You could tell he believed 2 things, that he'd been lucky and that he'd been wrong to push. He didn't joke. He cleaned his hands quietly by the embers. He kept rubbing at the soles of his boots like he was trying to pull a memory loose. After lights out, we did a sweep that felt heavier than the others. We walked the pier with flashlights trembling from our wrists and checked the gaps, the joints in the boards, the nails that stuck like teeth. The lake watched from a distance, a moody, reflective presence. I stood at the edge of the shore and stared at the water, not trying to see, but to not be surprised if something shifted. There are 2 moments in a night like that, the one where you tell yourself a rational explanation, and the one where the rules do their work. In the face of a nervous laughter, you can choose to make up explanations, or you can count shoes, map boundaries, ignore voices, keep the dock closed, check windows, stand away from the fence and practice a whistle that makes the world stop. We went back to routine the next day because that is what camps do. Halvorsen reassured parents in the morning pickup line with the same even cadence he used with staff. He didn't lie. He did not promise safety in the absolute. He promised procedure. He told us to expect the kids to be restless, to expect curiosity. He reminded us of the rules, not as folklore but as operating instructions. He told us to watch. We watched. At the end of that shift, when the sky went thin and yellow and the air smelled like the day's heat folding away, I walked down to the lake, partly because my shift allowed it, partly because my feet knew the path. The water was quieter than it had any right to be. I thought of the laminated cards stuffed into my pocket that morning, halogen against my thigh. The list of 7 felt like a map you were given when you were about to cross a landscape people told you not to trust. I wasn't thinking about heroism. I was thinking about procedures. I was thinking about the way humans manage things they can't explain by making them repeatable. I knelt and washed my hands in the shallows. The water was cold enough that my skin went numb, and looked into the dark to see if the lake would look back. It did in the slow, patient way it always had, like a thing expecting time. When I stood, someone touched my shoulder, and it was Megan. She had that small, practical face she uses at 3 in the morning when a kid needs stitches. "Don't go past the birch," she said, almost conversationally. Her eyes were on the path to the field. "Check tomorrow, we'll do another perimeter." I nodded. The rules were breathing around us. We wrapped up the night with radio checks and a final head count. The wind picked up, and sounds moved through the trees like a rumor. We took the routine seriously because routine is a kind of prayer, repeated, faithful, persistent. It is the thing that stops you from answering a sound in the woods. It is the thing that keeps you from reaching into the water. And yet, even with rules and drills and the stubborn, methodical work of people sticking to a plan, there are small things that go missing. Sometimes happiness is a ball in high grass. Sometimes it is a shoe that slides under a bunk right where it is supposed to be. Sometimes, on nights when the water leans toward the shore, something watches, and the rules, for all their comfort, feel like a fragile net. We didn't know then how fragile ours could be. We only knew we had the cards in our pockets and the whistle cold in our hand. The dock incident had taught us the cost of testing, and the quarry fence had proven the cost of stepping too close. We told ourselves the rest would be routine. We went back to the cabins with the light from our flashlights sliced across the path like bandages. That night, after the kids fell asleep under mosquito netting and the last of the counselors made their rounds, a screen door banged somewhere like a warning. I lay awake for a while, listening to the camp rip itself into small sounds. A tent peg settling, the far-off bark of a dog, the steady breathing of the world. I thought of shoes under bunks, of the broken birch, of the lake's slow testing, of tapping on glass, of a still figure beyond chain link, and of the whistle that made us obey. The rules were ridiculous and essential at once. They were not stories to scare children into obedience. They were procedures that had been passed down until they were habit. They were the camp's institutional memory made human, laminated cards in a man's hand, read aloud and then enforced with the quiet of someone who had seen what you were not supposed to see and did not want to see it again. We thought the worst thing that could happen had already happened that week, that the dock was a test we'd learned from. We were, in the way teams can be, complacent, calm in the knowledge we'd practiced enough to respond. We ran the drills and answered our radio beeps like mechanical prayers. That complacency, even the smallest kind, is the space where a missing sock can become a missing child. It is where a pair of shoes under a bunk can become a timeline. It is where the difference between a joke and a rule can be the difference between a story you tell around a fire and a thing you tell to make sure someone comes home safe. I didn't know we would be tested again, slower and stranger, with the rules as our only manual. I only knew that in the long light before dawn, the lake lay like an unread page, patient and waiting, and that the 7 cards in my pocket felt heavier than the plastic they were cut from. The next morning arrived thin and urgent, like a note slipped under the door. A mist clung low to the field, and the gravel road had that wet, sifted sound underfoot that made everything feel a little slower. We were on shift rotation. Megan and I had the early walkthrough after sunrise. The kids were supposed to be up for breakfast. The sun only just found the tops of the pines. Evan Porter was a 10-year-old with a mop of hair that never stayed combed, a freckled nose, and a laugh that came out in little hiccups. He'd been here 2 summers. His parents said camp was where he became brave, but the way he moved at the edge of activities had always been tentative, like someone trying out a new pair of shoes. He was talkative at meal lines and clutched a dog-eared paperback when he thought no one was looking. He had a habit of leaving his sock halves balled in the bottom of his trunk and then wondering where one went. The counselors loved him, not because he was remarkable, but because he was unremarkable in the most ordinary, enthusiastic way. We went cabin to cabin like we always did. Laughing kids were hauled out of blankets, the bunks sighed, the walls caught the smell of toothpaste and soap and someone's prank perfume. Megan and I trailed our flashlights across the floorboards and counted shoes. It was a ritual by now. Eyes down, heels to heel, heels aligned with the frame, a quick tap on the bed for the counselor, a double tap for the camper. The shoes read like a ledger, names signed in leather and canvas. When we stepped into cabin 11, the world tilted. Evan's shoes were under his bunk, obedient as ever. They were there in the neat way they always were, slightly scuffed at the toe from the mud near the mess hall, a thumbnail of a rip at the side from a stick. He should have been in the bunk above them, breathing like a child who had spent energy and marshmallows. There was a folded blanket on the top bunk, as if someone had left in the night and gone somewhere else. No sign of a struggle, no overturned trunk, just a neat, empty bed frame and shoes resting where they belonged. There is a particular terror in that small, stubborn correctness. An item where it's supposed to be that tells you something impossible. Megan crouched and squared her shoulders in one small professional motion. "He didn't leave with shoes," she said, voice low and steady. We didn't exclaim. We did not let panic leap into the space where procedure had to move. That was the point. Things could go sideways in a blink if you fetishized drama. Halverson's rule was precise. Count shoes first. I called it in, low and by the book, using the camp channel we had practiced on the second day. Base to all hands, this is Jesse, cabin 11. Shoes present, one bunk empty. Initiate Rule 1 protocol. Lockdown. Repeat, lockdown. The radios replied in clipped bursts. Rick's voice came first, calm like seasoned timber. "On my way, Halverson inbound." Tyler's answer was shorter, a brittle edge in it, nervous energy masquerading as bravado. Shane clicked his tongue and said he was staging at the lodge for water checks. Halverson's voice was a blanket that folded itself over the room when he spoke. As brief as possible, no improvisation. Pair up, check interior first, then the perimeter. Whoever finds the first sign, mark it. Do not break into the woods alone. Remember Rule 3. We closed the gates. The kids were shepherded into the mess hall 2 at a time. Breakfast was delayed to allow orderly headcounts. Parents' cars still sat 2 fields over. The reception at camp was a thin, disgruntled signal that sometimes held and sometimes did not. The last thing any of us wanted was to create panic that would travel faster than the truth. We started with cabin checks, systematic, calm, mechanical. Megan and I retraced every movement Evan might have made in the last hours. The short run to the latrine, the way he'd complained last night about cold feet, his last scene sitting up in a circle at the campfire after the carriage house sing-along. Everyone offered timestamps, small anchors. Saw him at 9:17 p.m. at the bonfire. He left his flashlight at the table. He was okay when the counselors walked lights out. Logistics were sacred in those hours. We mapped his last known locations on a grease-stained camp map in the mailroom and put sticky notes for checkpoints. Halverson had us work on an assumption list, possible exits, likely paths, witnesses, environmental hazards. We did not leap to monsters on the first pass. Monsters, if they exist, do not help with the immediate needs. Calories, shelter, a calm head count. Rule 1 had given us the first improbable data point. The shoes said that Evan had not walked out of the cabin in the night. That meant either someone had carried him, he had crawled barefoot, or he had moved in a way that defied ordinary logic. The question reorganized our search. We split into protocol pairs. Megan and I took the north perimeter toward Field 3 and the broken birch. Rick and Halverson took the quarry fence side. Tyler, against orders, wanted the shoreline, and Shane accompanied him because he was the lifeguard and could not be denied near water. We briefed each pair, radios on channel 1, keep line of sight to the next pair, call in if anything irregular. We marked the approximate time of departure on the radio and our last known coordinates by way of the map in the office. The sun came up as a slow promise. The grass soaked our boots. The early day air held a scent I came to associate with search operations, a mineral metallic smell that wasn't quite blood, but something like iron warmed and carried by the wind. We walked in grid patterns, headlights cutting the underbrush into slices. I checked every hollow, every culvert under the gravel road, every place a 10-year-old could hide, and then forget how to find his way back. We found odd things, small evidence that could be read in 2 ways. Someone had dragged a wet sock 3 yards past the swing set toward the tree line. There was a single footprint on the gravel near the boathouse, a bare heel, dirt packed into the arch, like a signature. There was a lone sneaker, not Evans, wedged under the broken birch, older and sun-bleached. We marked each with a scrap of red tape and reported it in calm phrases into the radio. Halverson logged timestamps into a notepad with methodical strokes. At the birch we found a scatter of marshmallow crumbs. Old charcoal, not a fresh pinprick. That older ball we'd retrieved earlier was nearby, half buried in grass. Someone had left a sleeve, fragile and aged, the camp logo threadbare. The map of evidence started to look like a palimpsest, new tracks over old sorrow. Halverson crouched and examined a faint trail leading into the pines. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Don't follow it. Ring the perimeter." "Tyler, stay at the shoreline until we get him on radio." Tyler, restless, shrugged and said, "I'm not waiting. If he's near the water—" "No," Halverson said. It was a small, final word. It carried the weight of past summers and small, remembered mistakes. Rule 3. If the woods call your name, do not answer, hung between us like an admonition. We moved along the edge of the trees in pairs, calling softly, names swallowed by the pines, our voices small in the wood's appetite. We were careful to avoid patterns that mimicked human cadence, because you cannot always trust what will answer back. Megan kept a hand on the strap of her radio, as if to anchor herself physically to the frequency of the group. We called Evan's name in practiced intervals, in voices that were both real and ironically hollow from use. Evan, Evan Porter, Buddy. At the quarry fence, the chain link shivered with condensation. Rick held his binoculars and had the steady look Halverson liked in his deputies. Watchful, careful. He scanned the cut like a man who inventories hazard by lines. Could the ground be loose? Could someone fall in? The figure we'd seen a week ago was not there. There was, though, a whiteness at the lip of the quarry, where sunlight struck a slick stone. That whiteness for a second read like a face. I reminded myself to metabolize details slowly. Humans make faces where there are none. We radioed updates every 15 minutes. The fire of our training had turned into a methodical exhaustion. Check-in, sweep, repeat. We tracked the time, and we rationed hope like a field ration. Halverson had us set a rally point at the dock for 5 minutes after each sweep. The dock was closed, but accessible for a staged rescue if need be. The idea was to present a line of control and to deprive panic of improvisation. The first real break came from the campsite kitchen. Someone found a smear of sand across the mess hall stoop, like a path leading from the showers. The smudge was darker than the surrounding gravel, a seam of moisture that hummed with the sun's first heat. There was a set of shallow barefoot prints that passed under the stoop and continued toward the lake. They were small, tenacious. Toes splayed, nails faintly visible, as if someone had been walking on the line between water and sand. "What we thought we saw in the cabin is now a path," Halverson said quietly when Megan told him. He folded his hands and looked at the map. He then said the sentence that made sense of everything in a way. "We follow the mundane until it refuses narrative. We do not invent urgency unless evidence compels it." He had the authority of someone who had played both defense and offense with bad nights. We moved toward the lake like animals that knew the smell of a trap. At the waterline we slowed to a crawl. The grass dropped into sand, then into a band of silt that smelled of rot and algae. The shoreline was ringed with the small, ordinary debris of life, broken life preservers, a child's plastic shovel, a bottle with a sun-faded label. Evan's footprint led to the exact edge of the shallows and then stopped. Where the footprint stopped, there was the impression of a heel in the wet silt, a depression shallow as a coin. "Barefoot," Shane said. "He walked right down to the water." "We need to check the surface," Rick answered. He was careful. He had the lead. He scanned, flashlight beams stuttering across the water in parallel stripes. There was nothing at first. No bodies, no sudden commotion. The lake lay like an in-breath, the same slow, bothersome smell of cold algae and river mud. Then, just beyond where the flashlights touched, the surface rippled in a way that made your throat clamp. It was slow and patient, an unfolding, not a violent burst. Something under the water's skin moved in a measured, investigative way. It wasn't leaping. It was extending like a curiosity. When it surfaced enough to suggest a face, the light caught a pale, oval shape. It puckered the world into a single point. Evan stood at the water's edge. He was smaller in the open air than in our imaginations. His shirt stuck to his shoulders from dew. He was barefoot, hands at his sides, looking out over the water as if watching an instruction manual. He did not flinch when we called his name. He did not turn quickly. His eyes were wide and empty in a way that terrified me more than any active harm. "Evan," I said his name like a rope, throwing it across the distance. He blinked once slowly, as if someone outside time had pressed a button, and that had been that. He whispered something. The syllable had the cadence of a word he knew, but not quite the meaning of, then turned his feet toward the water. Rick moved, hand on my shoulder, in a businesslike check-in. The situation, the plan. Halverson's voice came across the radio. "Keep your distance." Do not engage physically yet. Observe from flank positions. Tyler, hold at the tree line. Shane, be ready at the water. 3-whistle protocol if separation becomes impossible. It was a tableau where ritual collided with the thing we saw in the water. The thing beneath the surface did not lash. It watched. Faces surfaced, then flattened back, like someone pressing against the inside of a sheet. Pale ovals, impressionistic and impossible, arranged at random distances from the shore. They did not call. They did not shriek. They were patient. Evan took a step forward and then another. His toes found a cold eddy, and then a ripple moved across the lake as if the water had remembered a pattern and followed it. He moved closer to where the frogs hid, and past the place the rocks dipped in a notch. He was not walking as a child who is wary of deep water. He walked as someone following a tune. We moved then because we had to. We formed a line with our shoulders broad and our radios ready. Our motion was not heroic choreography. It was an obedience to training. Megan and I flanked. Rick and Halverson covered the center. Shane slid to the water with a rescue throw line coiled and the lifebuoy at his hip. Tyler kept his distance. He did not cross Halverson's explicit orders, but his hands shook. I called to Evan as I walked, small phrases steady like you speak to someone disoriented. Evan, you can come back, we're here. This is the shore. He didn't respond in a normal way. He made soft, musical noises, a string of consonants and vowels that almost sounded like gratitude and almost like nonsense. When his foot hit the first cold layer, something at the edge of the water seemed to pay attention. A pale oval drifted to his knees and held, as if testing the temperature. I moved to place my hand on his shoulder, just a human touch to remind him that the world had anchors, but his body was not there in the way it needed to be. The touch slid off him like mist on glass. He could have been a puppet in that instant, tethered to a force we could not see. He could have been choosing. He could not have been making any decision we could recognize. His fingers curled as if to hold something you cannot see. I will not invent violence where there was none to be described. He did not scream or cry. He simply leaned forward. 3 blasts on my mark if he won't let go, Halverson said. He didn't raise his voice. He recorded protocol in the air like a man who counts prayers. We tried the simple human things first. Tug on a sleeve. A voice nearly breaking with strain, a small joke to tug memory. He blinked and the pale faces drifted closer. Shane reached out the throw line with an experienced, practiced motion, and the rope unfurled in a slow, controlled arc like a lasso. Evan's hands lifted and took it with the blankness of someone obeying a gentle order he didn't fully hear. For a second, we all thought we had him, that the rope would be a bridge back. Then something, from the flat greens of the lake, slid like a page of water. It caught the rope and then let go. It was not a vicious pull, so much as an inquiry that held and then released. In that moment, Evan looked like a man reconsidered, and he leaned into the water as if to answer. Tyler made a lunging move, and Halverson barked, sharp but not cruel. No. The word was more like a wall than a sentence. We had drilled ourselves to resist instinctive heroics. Panic is improvisation's ally. Our training was to maintain a structure until clarity. Rick did not hesitate. He had his whistle in his mouth before anyone else. He blew one piercing note, the first blast that meant hold. The sound cut cleanly across the water, and the creatures paused, the ripples stilled like a hand on a spinning top. Evan froze with them, body half bent forward like a question mid-sentence. Rick added the second blast. There was a ripple in every counselor's shoulder, a tightening as we felt the command sink. We formed our count and began a roll call. The names came out like beads. Jesse, here. Megan, here. Tyler, here. The ritual set everything small and mortal into a ledger. Names, locations, the sound of breath. We were doing what Halverson had taught us. Our feet were planted, meeting gravity. When Rick blew the third blast, it was as if someone had flicked a switch in the world. The air changed. The pale faces drew back from the surface like someone peeling a sticker from glass. The line of light over the water's skin flattened and held. The lake exhaled. Evan's body, which had been lean and forward, sagged and went heavy with returning will. It was the smallest of returns, his shoulders relaxing, his eyes clearing, a blink that meant yes to being present. We moved then, quick and deliberate, the way a team grips fibers. Shane wrapped the lifebuoy lines around Evan's chest and hauled him backward, not by brute force, but by rotating our shoulders and making our bodies into a hinge. We pulled him out of the shallow edge where mud sucked at our boots. When he collapsed onto the gravel, he was breathless but alive. He tasted of lake, damp and mineral, and he smelled like something small had brushed him. We did not celebrate. We were too experienced to mistake a single recovery for resolution. He coughed, then cried, a single raw sound that quieted the set of our jaws. Halverson knelt, steady hands, and checked for injuries. He did the tidy, clinical things in a voice that had seen too many nights. Temperature, pulse, signs of shock. Evan's fingers were cold as the underside of a stone. Radio medical, Halverson said. Emergency transport to the access. Parents notified. His words were efficient. The camp, in those minutes, was a machine functioning for the preservation of life. We walked him up from the shore. He kept saying one phrase in loops, small and rhythmic, something like an answer to a song we could not hear. He didn't remember leaving his bed. He told us, in staccato fragments, that he had dreamed of a place beneath the skin of the water. He smiled when he said it, like a boy remembering a pleasant book. He did not seem to recall anything that constituted malice or meaning to us. He simply had been somewhere else. The EMTs arrived in the back of a vehicle that coughed diesel, like it was apologizing for existing. They checked him fast and with careful, professional pity. They wrapped one of his shivering shoulders in an emergency blanket. Halverson sat on the bumper of the vehicle and wrote notes in a lined pad, his handwriting neat and small and careful. He spoke to the paramedic in clipped phrases about observation, about hypothermia risk, even though his eczema suggested a cold that had not been there long, and about the need to report anything odd. We fed Evan warm broth in the mess hall and made him sit with an adult between him and any door. He ate slowly, more from automatic appetite than delight. Parents were called and met us at the access road an hour later. They were hollowed out with that particular brand of parental terror that I hope to never know fully. Halverson explained what he could, procedures, interventions, timelines, like someone translating field language into a script that could be read calmly by anxious folks. He did not invent explanation. He read the ledger of facts and left the rest to the dust of other people's speculation. The press release that went out later used the language we teach ourselves when we must reduce strangeness into digestible lines. Missing camper found near Lakeshore. No foul play suspected. Under observation. It was bureaucratic and inadequate in equal measure. We use the language because institutional truth needs a base of stability. It also served to keep the rumor mills from running faster than the facts. We had followed the rules. We had counted shoes and noticed the anomaly. We had obeyed borders and not chased into the dark alone. We had not answered the wood's voice. We had kept the dock closed until absolutely necessary. We had not breached the quarry fence, and when it was required, we blew the whistle, 3 notes into the night that sheared something away. I will not claim that the rules were miraculous. I will not say that they had the power to keep danger forever at bay. But they were a structure that moved us together, the way a net pulls taut at the right moments. When Evan leaned forward into the water, the whistle compelled us to freeze, to count, to regroup and reorient our action into something coordinated. Without that choreography, I suspect we would have engaged in heroics and scattered like small flares in the dark. In the days that followed, we did what organizations do after a scare. There were debriefings at the lodge that smelled of coffee and the faint sweetness of burn cream. Halverson insisted on a written report with timestamps and witness statements. He sat with parents and clarified exactly what we had seen and how we had responded, with the rare, quiet candor that made people trust him even while they wanted more answers. He rewrote some of the postings and added extra signage and a temporary wooden barrier at the pier. We bolstered night lighting along the more traveled shore route and instituted a mandatory 2-counselor shore patrol until further notice. We also did the emotional work that is less clean but more necessary. Counselors had quiet conversations in the map room where the place smelled like pencil graphite and old coffee. Tyler sat for a long time, face in his hands, replaying the exact instant he'd thought of doing something brave, and then frozen by Halverson's no. He apologized, sincerely, many afternoons. He learned in a way that was both humiliating and useful that sometimes not acting is the bravest thing you can do. Evan's parents pulled him close and cried in the parking lot, like people who discover that non-explanations can still mean safety. They did not ask for metaphysical answers. They wanted their son alive and his future intact. The county asked questions that the camp answered with formality. The closure of the camp for 3 days was called Precautionary Wildlife Activity Concerns in the letter to parents. Halvorsen preferred those words. They shaped an institutional grief into something manageable. He never appealed to myth or to monsters in official statements. He stuck to policy and to the famished, necessary scaffolding of protocol. We did find other small things after Evan was recovered. A fishing weight marked with a faded number clung to a reed near where he'd stood. A child's hair ribbon, faded to a ghost, was tangled in a piece of driftwood by the boathouse. There were pale smudges along a window jamb at Cedar Ridge that matched the prints we had seen a week before. The map of artifacts grew, quiet and stubborn. Halvorsen filed each piece into an evidence box with the kind of tenderness he might otherwise reserve for a newborn. Labels, dates, initials. He was collecting a language to talk to something he could not name. Camp Blackridge did not change the rules after that summer, in the way outsiders often expect. The dock got a new board and an improved sign. The quarry fence had a reinforced post. The lighting got a modest upgrade. But the laminated cards remained the same, in Halvorsen's hands and in the pockets of every councillor who came through. He told us, in one of his low, steady briefings, "You can add hardware, but don't replace common sense with gadgets. The rules are habits. They are made for the boring, for the repetitive, and those are the things that stop chaos. We keep them exactly as they are because they are meant to bind our practice, not our belief." The institutional memory preserved itself like that, small, exact, and stubbornly procedural. People at the county asked for more thorough investigations. We gave what we had, and we kept what we didn't. Theories swarmed where facts thinned. A few councillors left after that season, some quietly and some with stories of their own. The next summer there were more cameras in public places, and the shore patrols remained double. Parents volunteered to sit in the watching benches. But the 7 laminated rules, the odd specific litany Halvorsen had given us, were unchanged. They were less a superstition than a manual. I left camp that fall with the cards tucked into the back of a notebook inside my bag. I took them like talismans and like memory aids. I dated my notes and wrote small clinical entries about the night, as if language could lock time into a drawer. I moved forward in life, took jobs, made tentative plans for an apartment, and sometimes when a late-night rain sounded like a tapping on a window, I'd find myself reciting them like a list of confessions. Years later, when the sun slants differently over late summers, and my hair has that adult grey at the temples, I still drive out when Halvorsen asks. He calls occasionally and says, "We need an extra pair of hands this weekend. Come down." The camp has shifted in minor ways, new paint, a modernized kitchen, the occasional new coach, but it holds to the old bones. The quarry fence stands where it stood, the birch still split like a signpost, the lake still with its temperamental skin. The laminated cards are now pocked and smudged at the corners, the plastic dulled by sweat and use. They are still given to new councillors with the same quiet authority. Sometimes I come to the shore at dusk. I watch the water compress and loosen, the way evening readjusts its face. People ask if I ever saw anything in the lake again. I tell them the truth. I cannot prove anything I've seen there is different from the way water behaves. I will not invent an origin for the pale faces, nor will I hold the lake responsible for what people do when they go into the dark. I will tell you the other truth, the one that lingers with me. There are behaviors worth preserving that have nothing to do with belief. Count shoes, honor boundaries, treat a voice in the woods as a hazard. Do not go near a fence after dark. Keep the dock closed if it makes sense, and when the whistle calls, stop, count, regroup, the ritual will save more than it seems. Once a boy came down to the shore and asked me whether he would see them, those pale shapes, if he dared look. He was 12, lanky and eager. I looked at him and thought of Evan in a blanket in the mess hall, of Halvorsen scribbling notes, and of the way a whistle made a group of flustered humans stop moving, in a way that might be described as holiness if you were the poetic sort. Maybe. I said truthfully. Or maybe you'll only see the shape of your own fears. Either way, bring shoes and come back with another person. That's the procedure that keeps us alive. That answer satisfied him, oddly enough. It was practical, and kids often prefer practical to metaphysical. They prefer a list they can follow to a mystery they cannot solve. That, in the end, is what the 7 rules were always about. They were small, repeatable things that made things manageable. Camp Blackridge remains closed to day trippers now more often than not, because federal grants and insurance make for complicated calendars. When I drive by and see the Blackridge sign, it looks less like an invitation and more like a careful warning. The world beyond its gravel road is loud and procedural and less forgiving. The camp keeps its rituals because the rituals helped a child come back from the edge of something quiet and hungry, or because we survived by habit and not by heroics, depending on the explanation you prefer. You can call those 7 rules bizarre. I will not argue. They are odd in phrasing and particular in scope, but they are not jokes. They are a manual for the management of small terrors and for the prevention of mass confusion. They are a list of actions that, when performed, made the difference between an empty bunk and a child breathing at our feet. The lake still watches. I watch back sometimes. It is a reciprocal thing. Human attention thrown like a pebble, and water reflecting it with an answer that is never complete. I do not always like the way the evening leans toward the shore. I do not always know what the pale shapes mean, but I know the cadence of a whistle and the steadiness of a head count. I know that rules, even the bizarre ones, are the language of a place that has learned to hold its breath together. If this crept you out, and you want more stories from places you think you know, subscribe and I'll bring you another one. From the edge of somewhere that looks ordinary until it isn't.